Hey guys, let's go ahead and draw some hands using the basics of form to create a rudimentary structure so that we can have a better understanding of how the fingers come together and what faces are in shadow versus what faces are facing the light. And using form and structure to do this kind of thing is one of the best ways to start to understand why light and shadow behave the way they do. Okay, so this is the reference that we're going to use. Plenty of detail in here. This is what I'm going to be looking at on my screen. What you'll be following along with is the line by line, step by step that I show on my paper. So let's get into this. When you're constructing a hand, it's useful to think about the largest kind of geometric bodies that you can think about. If I were to roughly break it down, you have this central palm, right? It's roughly the kind of a square, so really roughly speaking, okay? Out of this corner, you see the thumb popping out, and out of this side over here, you see the four fingers radiating out. Okay, so that's the basic understanding. And within, it's not a perfect square, obviously. This pad of the thumb is a little bit thicker. There's variation within, but we can understand it at least in those parts to begin with. Palm, 5 fingers. All right. Let's start with the far side palm over here. Again, I'm using this this light grip. And I'm looking to map out the top surface of the palm, okay? It's roughly a square with some slightly curved sides like this, okay? There's a bit of thickness to it, and I'm going to treat it, for now, I'm going to treat this as if it's like a solid block, okay? Slightly abstracted. There's some thickness to it. It gets thinner over here. By the time it gets to the meat of the palm, it does get thicker, but overall, it's kind of like a piece of tofu. Okay. Now, we're going to break down the thumb now, which is popping out of over here. And we're going to break this down also in terms of turning it into kind of a rectangular prism to start with. This is the first part of the digit. And then I'm going to separate out the thumb tip kind of draw it as a separate kind of entity looking sort of like this. Okay. So we're working with large, not large, but like basic blocks just for now, okay? The index finger, I'm paying close attention to the angle of each digit as well as the size, and I'm looking to break it down into these separate blocks, okay? It's probably a little too thick, so I'm going to thin it out a little bit. There we go. There's some space over here. And there's some slight bends in the finger itself. I'm keeping things blocky, because when I eventually go in to shade this stuff in, the blockiness and these sharp edges will actually help me map out the, what do you call it? It'll help me map out where the terminators of the shadows are a little better. Okay, the tip of the finger I kind of rounded out the very tip of it into like a, I guess, sort of like a half circle shape, but it still wants to read like a solid block of some kind. Okay. So let's keep going with this for the middle finger. Have a little space over here. Okay, just going digit by digit. And drawing things out just a single block at a time also helps to break things down, like break something down that's complex like this into more manageable bite-sized pieces. And again, over here for the tip of the middle finger, I'm going to treat it a similar way to what I did over here. It's sort of a rectangular box, but with a rounded tip. Okay. Now over here, let's start with the ring. It's coming out at a more flattened angle. Okay. And pretty close to that, we actually see the pinky coming out as well. And the digits are a lot shorter for that. Since the pinky's going in front of the ring finger, I'm going to draw that out first. Just one digit at a time, one face at a time. Okay, and here I'm taking a pause to take a look at my overall proportions and sort of check it with what I see in the reference image. I took the bend of this pinky a little too far and slightly too long, so I'm going to adjust that. Some of the thicknesses in the beginning over here, I'm going to adjust that too. To make the fingers look a little more like they're fanning out. Okay, and you can make these adjustments as well. Now, this whole portion of my hand is a little too large compared to the length of my fingers here. You might notice that happening for you too, or something similar to that. So I'm actually going to have to erase the thumb and a good portion of the palm and shorten that up. Okay, so I have some better, more accurate proportions over here. Okay. So there you have a hand broken down into a palm in the center with 4 fingers radiating out of this side and the thumb popping out of this one corner. Okay. Right now that you have this basic structure, you can then go ahead and map in the smaller details, okay, as in like this bump over here at the joint of the thumb before it transitions into the muscle, right? There's a large muscle over here, okay, that like controls the thumb going this way, all right? So we're working from the overall, right, down to the finer details like you see in the bend of the wrist, things like that, okay? What you also want to take advantage of here is now that you've mapped out the kind of structure of this using these blocky shapes, you're actually in a great position to begin the shading process, just the rough process of it for now, by filling in the areas that you know are going to be in the shadow. Okay. Don't go too dark with this. This is just the initial mapping, and you're going right up to the edge over here, okay, that you're initially imagined as a sharp edge, okay. This isn't the finished shading, it's just the rough beginning of it. And these sharp corners turn into, they're a good way to map out the terminator. Terminator being the point on any form where the surface begins to turn away from the light source. Okay. One of the common mistakes when it comes to drawing hands and fingers in particular is to use cylinders, right? While there's nothing wrong with using cylinders so long as you do it effectively, what tends to happen is you end up with sausage fingers. Okay, I've drawn a plenty of sausage fingers myself. And one of the ways to avoid doing that is to create a structure for the fingers using these blocky rectangular prism shapes instead of cylinders. So there you go. This is the broadest way of defining where the major shadows are, as well as where each of those major shadows start to transition into lighter areas. Okay, so the terminator kind of goes down the wrist over here. Okay. I'm going to lighten up this sketch over here. So it's starting to shape up, okay? And we're still using the rough light lines, okay? And light pressure to draw this out at this stage, okay? Now you can go back in there and start to look at some of the finer details, okay? Like the webbing around the thumb right over here. We can start to add that, okay? And some of the stronger shadows in between the fingers, like you see over here, okay? And you see some of these shadows extending slightly into the palm. Some darker areas over here. And you also see this portion of the palm having a shadow with more gradual transitions around these edges, okay? So we're working from the overall down to the detailed instead of starting with the most detailed lines, trying to capture those in like exacting detail. We're going from large to small, okay? So now I can begin to think about some of the lines that we see on the palm itself, okay? And these are getting into the small details. And then this edge over here that I initially defined as just a clean line, I can start to break that up, okay? Using the reference, I'm taking a look at the actual shape of the shadow and how it kind of undulates up and down. The hand has a lot of moments where it wrinkles and folds with the skin, and that's what's causing these this variation in this the edge of this terminator. And by the time it gets over here to the wrist, you start seeing more dark lines that extend out towards the other side of the wrist. And we're beginning to add in some of the skin textures as well. There's some of these diamond shapes that start to form. Okay. You see a line kind of making a Y shape like this. And then from the other side of the palm, there's a line coming down and hooking over here. Now if you notice, I am not drawing these lines with a hard line like that, okay? I'm shading them in with light pressure still, okay? So even though they're lines, so that I can add some variation while being mindful of their direction piece by piece, I'm shading in these lines as opposed to hard lining them in. Okay, here's a line going straight through the middle pretty much. And a few more here within this darker area. Okay, and I can start capturing some of the texture in the palm of the hands using this hatching pattern, okay, while following the kind of topology of the palm itself. Okay. Let's see. Let's take a pause and check in with. Yeah, there is an abundance of texture on the palm, right? While we don't have to capture every single detail, I think a little bit more will help out, particularly between the digits of the fingers. You can start adding in some of these lines. Okay. As well as over here. We have some lateral lines across the finger. Just a few of those. Some lines coming in like that. Similar lines over here for the ring finger. And then finally for the pinky, a few more lines in between the digits right there. And over here. The tips of the fingers and the fingerprint on them have a kind of swirling pattern that affects the it kind of breaks up the straight edge of the shadow a bit. So you can add some of those flicks right there. Okay. So it's shaping up a little more. There is some shadow over here in this area of the palm. And other darker portions that are interspersed throughout the palm. It looks like this person has a real working hands. It looks like there's plenty of calluses and resulting in these darkened areas interspersed throughout the palm. Okay. Now, if I had started with these small details, there would be a likelihood of me missing out on mapping out the largest areas of shadow, like I began with. That's one of the main advantages of starting with a basic form to create the fundamental structure. Okay. There's some more lines right over here at the base of the wrist. A few more lines right over here where the thumb meets the palm. A line going across there. These are small details that start to add some texture. Okay. Some lighter shadows on the pads of the fingers over here, or the front faces of the fingers, or the I'm not sure what to call it or how to locate it, but these sides of the fingers. Okay. Okie doke. Now, let's go back into the major areas of shadow and add in some more contrast, okay, by darkening in these shadows while constantly looking back at the reference image. To gain more and more information and pay attention to detail about where the shadow actually terminates and at what exact point it begins to lighten up. Okay. And you might find that you're adding more contrast here. You're probably going to need to go back into some of the lines you started to define with some harder pressure. You can begin adding in some of the texture that will be created by the fingerprints. The location of these main shadows is something we already established. So this part of the shading process, you're not trying to locate anything anymore, so you can you can work with much more confidence. One of the other beginner mistakes to avoid when it comes to shading and creating value in general is there's a big temptation to smooth out these transitions and kind of like gray everything out. It's the way light actually falls off of a form like this, be it a finger or like a geometric form. The way light begins to fall off, it actually falls off quite quickly. That's a phenomenon called Lambertian fall off. A scientist named Charles Lambert discovered this behavior. I forgot what year it was, but it was a while ago, and he discovered that a plane of white, like a white plane, right? I'm not sure what it was made of, but at a certain angle, right, when laid up against a light source, it begins to, the light begins, basically the shadow goes from dark to light real quickly. Okay, a lot quicker than you might think. That's the simple way to put it. So even though it seems like a hard line like this, that's actually a lot closer to what light does out in nature. Okay, there is a slight transition, of course. It doesn't, there's no like purely straight line in between there, but what you want to also avoid is over blending these edges. Okay, still just darkening in these main shadows. Almost there. Let's give it a sharpen. also noticing here that I didn't see before, there's actually some reflected light coming in from the bottom side. Okay, so I'm going to leave a portion of this, the bottom of this palm within this core shadow a little bit lighter. For now, I'm just going to avoid that area right over here. And I'll go back in there with some shading, making it intentionally lighter than all the rest. So right over here is where I'm noticing the reflected light. Now, if you notice, this whole time I am not using the blending stump. I've said something similar in one of my other lessons. It's not that I'm against the blending stump. Okay? It's just that it's important to be able to shade something in, establish the most important value relationships in terms of what's the darkest, what's the lightest, and then for details and kind of that icing on the cake, then you go in there with the blending stump. That's usually going to yield you a cleaner, better result. Using the blending stump prematurely and over relying on it tends to result in a drawing that's just mostly all the same shade of gray. That's another kind of common mistake that you see in terms of working with value, working with shading. Okay, definitely want to darken in this middle portion of the palm. Before I do that, though, I'm going to darken out these lines so that they don't get lost. And here, I'm going to use a hatching to generally follow the direction of the hand print, the palm print, to give it some texture. Okay, so that's kind of that's coming along. Let's take a little short break to just kind of observe this. So this is what we're working with. We're drawing out this right side hand over here. And here's what the hand is looking like so far. I do have the palm of the hand is a lot lighter in terms of what I have drawn so far. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think we can start to add in the finer texture on the palm of the hand. In terms of the direction of these lines, they kind of wrap around this way in sort of a U shape. Okay. Here you can have some artistic license. And you're just texturing the palm of the hand. It's slightly darker around the rightmost edge over here. There's a couple lines that sort of missed that we can sort of kind of darken in here. This is getting to the point where we're adding fine details. Okay. We've already established the major value relationships. Okay. This is the icing on the cake. have these overlapping diamond pattern in the skin that you might want to add in to show some texture. But you do not want to draw these in with too much pressure. I'm darkening in this area of the thumb to give it some more punch. And then let's go back in over here. It's actually got a small amount of shadow along the edge of the thumb like this. Start to add in some more of the texturing. And for the most part, this highlight near the tip of the thumb, I'm going to leave that alone. Let's go back into this area over here. Use the hatching to darken in these kind of pads of the palm right there. Okay. Don't want to over darken things. We do want to add some texture, some sense of flow. There's like a swirl I notice over here. I kind of like that. Didn't really notice that before. I can use this sort of flicking motion to blend out the shadow into the palm print. You might find that you need to add in some more darkness to the lines in the palm, like I'm doing right over here. Or add in some finer lines that you might have missed. Okay. There's some details on the fingers over here that we're going to add a little bit of texture to. Not using a lot of pencil pressure at all. Just enough to make some marks, some light gray marks. Working in some light texture into the tips of the fingers. Okay. Almost done. Just a few areas that I'm going to add some tiny, tiny hatching to. Can also smooth out some of the texture in some of these shadows over here. At this point, you can start to apply hard pressure. Okay. Now you're not mapping things out anymore. You know where stuff is at. You've already laid down most of the details you want. You can really punch in the shadow with hard pressure and start to refine some of these edge conditions too with your eraser. Just clean up some of those sketchy lines that are left over. Around the edges like that. You can really punch in the main shadows using plenty of generous pressure. So we're kind of we work this shadow in 3 parts really. Okay. First, we map them in after the initial structure was placed in blocky forms. We darken them in once. Okay. Right before we added in the finer details. And once we got done with that, this is kind of the last step as far as the shadow goes, where you're really punching it in, creating lots and lots of contrast. Okay, so that about does it. You can work on this some more, clean up the edges however much you'd like, clean out those sketchy lines, add in a couple more small fine details like this with tiny hatch marks. Okay, whatever gives it a sense of life for you. Okay, hopefully you had fun with that. Good luck. I'll see you in class.